Welcome to the August block of the month, and we are going to be doing some foundation paper piecing. And so to get started, this is what our block is going to look like, and these are going to be the corners of our strippy, scrappy borders that we made. So we are going to make 4 of these, and you can choose fabrics however they work into your quilt, whether they go in order or if you just pick, some that you like. And what I'm doing here is I'm just doing the black and white in the center and then 2 aqua and 2 gold. So this is our block, and let's get started. So I've made some copies and I printed it on newsprint paper, and that's just a very lightweight paper because we are going to be stitching on this and then having to tear it. So an easier to tear paper does work a little bit better, but you can use regular typing paper or whatever's available. So the first thing we're going to do is on all the lines that we will be stitching on, we're going to fold. And so I have an add a quarter ruler, and it has a narrow side on it, and I'm going to place that right on the line and then just do a fold of my paper. And it's okay if it's not exactly on it. You do want to get as close as possible because this is going to be just a visual guideline as to where we're putting our fabrics when we go to sew them on. So, okay, so we've got a crease there, and you can kind of see the folds in it. And we are going to be putting our fabric on the back side and then flipping it over to sew from the right side. So to get started, I have my fabrics already pre-cut, and the very first one that we're going to add is on the center, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue stick just right there on the paper, and that's just going to help hold the fabric in place. And then I'm going to just position it how it's going to be orientated with the right sides facing up. And then I'm going to check it and make sure, well, my glue didn't really stick, and make sure that it's going to cover all the lines of that particular shape when I sew it on. So that way I know that I've got it in place. And it might be helpful to hold it up to a light source or a window, or put it on a light box. I didn't get much glue, so I'm going to put on some more. And again, I'm just going to line it up and stick it on there. Okay, that seems to be holding better. Okay, and so that's the first step that we're going to do. And again, just make sure that your fabric is covering all the lines, past all the lines actually, on your paper pattern. Okay, and looks like it's nicely attached. And so we are going to trim now before we start sewing. So I'm going to trim, I'm going to start on the lines between A1 and A2. So I'm just going to fold that back along my fold, and I'm going to take my add a quarter ruler that has this little lip edge on there, and that's just going to sit right up on my paper, and then I can trim my fabric along the edge, and that leaves a 1/4 inch Okay, and there we have a 1/4 inch of fabric overhanging the paper. Okay, and now we're going to take our next piece, and this is going to be right sides facing the right sides of this fabric. And I'm just going to kind of place it on there so that the cut edges now are aligned. I want to make sure that this fabric is extended past the section that it's going to cover on my paper. So this is the paper, the piece that it has to cover, and so I can tell on this edge it is going to be over my dotted line, and the same on this edge. And you can hold it up to a light source and make sure that it is going to cover all the lines. Okay, and then once we have it in place, you can pin it from the front. I'm usually okay just holding it, and then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch exactly on the dotted line. Now I am going to start before the line actually happens, just 2 to 3 stitches. And I'm decreasing my stitch length. I want a very tiny stitch length on this paper so that it perforates it and it makes it easier to tear. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to stitch right on that line. And a few stitches pass. And then I can cut it, and let's take it over here and see what we have. Okay, so I'm going to just finger press it back on itself. And then if I hold it up, I can tell that it has covered all the areas that fabric needs to be to make that shape work in our block. Okay, so now we're ready to go on to the next one. So we lay it down, go ahead and put our paper folded on the crease that we made earlier. Use our add a quarter or any ruler where you can see a 1/4 inch line that you can have your fabric overhanging the paper by about a 1/4 inch. And what that does here now is it makes it super helpful when we're lining up our next piece of fabric. Because I have a straight edge here and I have a straight edge on this piece, it helps me get it in place a little bit easier. And again, we just want to check that the lines where the fabric is going to be covering it, we want to make sure that we have plenty of fabric that overlaps that area. And again, this is where a light source is handy. Okay, and then we're going to just take that to the machine. And we're going to stitch right on that line. And again, I'm starting a few stitches before the line. And we're going a few stitches after the line. And then we're going to flip it over. Fold this paper back, and from the front side I can see that again that fabric is covering where all my lines are, and so that I know I'm in good shape. If it got off a little bit and there isn't fabric covering past your dotted lines, that's actually going to be your cut line so that we can put our block into our quilt. So if your fabric's not covering it, you may want to go ahead and just take that piece off, reposition it, or get a new piece to put it on there, because you really do want to make sure that you have lots overhanging, and when you trim that down, then it's the exact size you need in the block. Okay, so let's go ahead and just keep adding our next ones. And again, I fold my paper on the crease. I'm trimming a 1/4 inch, and that's going to help me line up my next fabric when I add it on. Okay. And so I'm just going to take it and put it right on, lining up those edges. And I can tell on my paper that this is where the line meets, and I can see that my fabric overhangs by about a 1/4 inch, so that's good. And it ends up over here, and again I have about a 1/4 inch over there, so I'm good on that. And we can go ahead and stitch. Okay, and we'll flip that over. Just kind of do a finger press and looks good. You can go ahead and take an iron on there, but use a dry iron just because you do have paper back here, and if it's has moisture in your iron or any steam, it can make that paper soggy, and then it's just harder to work with. So we've added that piece and it covers all of our lines, so we're still in good shape. And then now we're on our last piece, and so we're gonna again fold the paper over. We're gonna put our ruler right next to the edge of that paper and trim that off and get our last piece of fabric to add on. Okay. And then again, we just want to check it to make sure that it's going to be covering all those lines that we need it to cover. And we'll go ahead and stitch that. Again, we're stitching right on that solid line. Okay. And flip it over. Looks kind of wild and funky from that side, but we are going to trim it all down. And again, we're just making sure that all of our edges are covered with fabric behind it. So it looks good. So now we can go ahead and we'll trim that up. And we are going to trim right on, whoa, sorry about that. We're going to trim right on the dotted lines, or the outside lines. Okay, so I'm going to take this ruler now and line it up so that I can see that I'm going to be cutting on that line. And I'm cutting right through the paper and the fabrics. Okay, we're lined up. Make our cut. And just keep working our way around here. Okay, and our last one. If it's hard to see if your ruler's right on the edge of that, what you can do is put your line so that the 1/4 inch markings on your ruler are actually on the solid line, because you want to cut a 1/4 inch away, because that's going to be your seam allowance. So you always want to make sure you got that 1/4 inch there. And there we have our block perfectly trimmed. And all of our fabrics are perfectly placed, and it's the exact size that we need for the quilt. So the foundation paper piecing really makes super accurate blocks, and it's very helpful if you do need something to be, you know, extremely accurate and get it the right size. So that's the advantage to paper piecing. And then now that we've got our blocks cut, you can leave the paper in there until you sew it into the quilt and then rip it all off. But I'm going to go ahead and just take it off right now. And I'm just kind of folding it along that crease line. I did have a really tiny stitch length, so it's coming off really easily. And you just kind of want to get all the paper removed. That one came off really good. Okay, and there we go. So we're going to make a total of 4 of these blocks. Okay, let's add our scrappy strippy borders on. And I have already measured the center of my quilt from top to bottom, because I'm going to attach the side borders first. And so one thing I did do is get my pieces to be kind of a minimum length that's less than what I needed for the quilt. And then the last piece that I added was fairly large, because I'm going to use this one to trim down, and then I don't have to worry about like a little tiny seam allowance being right next to the edge of where I need it to be. So that's kind of a little cheat, is to make the one of your end ones a little bit longer that we can trim down. Okay, so I know what my measurement is, and I'm going to take my ruler and place that on here. And I know where I have to trim this, and I'm just going to take my rotary cutter and my ruler and line it up to where I want it to be, and then we'll cut that strip off. Okay, and then to attach this border, I am going to fold it in half and find the center and get some pins. Pins are going to be helpful here. Anytime I do borders, I do use pins. Okay, I'm going to find the center, and I am going to mark that with a pin. And then I know the center, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here, but you can fold it in half and find the center here. And then we're going to line those up and pin that in place. So I'm pinning the center in place, right sides together. And then the outer edge, I'm going to line that up and put a pin in it. And come and do this end as well. So just put that on there flat, line up the very ends, put a pin in there, and then I'm just going to kind of pin it periodically where it's laying flat, and just a few more pins in there because I can kind of hold it in place as I'm sewing along. So again, just kind of make sure everything's flat, and we'll put a pin in there. And then using a 1/4 inch seam, we're going to go ahead and attach this side border. Okay, I've added both of the side borders, and then I've oriented my quilt now so that I'm working the top is here. And I am going to take the strip that is the length needed here, and we're going to add our cornerstones that we just paper pieced. And then to do that, I am just going to line it up so that the wider end here is facing the outermost, and the narrowest end is going to be right there in the point of our quilt. So we're going to add that to each end like that, and then I have one of those done right here. I've got the two ends added on here, and again I'm going to find my center of this border. And it's kind of hard because there's a seam right there, so do the best you can to get the center point. And then we're going to find the center point here and pin that in place. And that looks to be good right there. So put a pin. And then here I am going to pin to the very outer edge. Put a pin there. Okay, and then I'm going to just peek underneath, and I want the seam where my block was joined onto my strip to match up to the edge or the end of the border right there where my border is pieced onto my solid border. So I'm just going to line those, and that's not super critical, it's just that helps that point of your piece there kind of get in the point of your corner. But it is oversized, so it's not gonna, that point isn't gonna just come to, you know, the point in the corner. Okay, and then I'm just going to line these up and put a few pins in here, and then we're going to go ahead and attach that using a 1/4 inch seam, and then we'll be back. Okay, we have all those borders on, and our quilt is definitely getting bigger, but I do love how it looks. I'm pretty excited about it. Okay, and so to finish off this month's work, we are going to go around it again with our background fabric, and do another border, and that's going to lock all these little seams in place so that they don't, you know, start to kind of come apart as we store our quilts and wait for next month. So to do that, we're going to stitch all of our background strips together, and I did just a straight seam, all your strips end to end to one giant strip. Okay, and then what we're going to do is I am going to trim off the selvage here. We don't need that on there. And get a nice straight edge to begin with. Okay, and I'm going to do the side borders first. And since it's getting much bigger, it's harder to use the tape measure and get it lined up. I'm going to show you just another way that I'm going to do this here. And first of all, I'm going to just right sides together. Let's see. Okay, just maybe not along the very edge, but in a little ways, just to get a good overall measurement. You could measure from the center. In fact, let's just kind of do that. That's going to stay on the table a little bit better. So I'm going to start with my edges lined up here at the very edge over here. So get those going, and I am going to just put a pin in there so it doesn't shift on us. Okay. And then I'm going to spread out my quilt and move it along and do the same thing with the fabric of the border. And now when I get to this end, scooch it where you can kind of see it here. Okay. And it matches the same length as the inside. I am going to just fold this border strip back on itself right along the edge of the quilt and make a crease. And then that is where I'm going to cut my strip. Okay, and that's going to be a side border. And now for the next one, I'm going to cut the exact same width, and to do that, I'm going to use the one I just cut as a template, and I'm going to make the next one the exact same length. Okay, just slide it along. Until we get there. I'm going to kind of just pin that in place, and then find a piece of my cutting mat here and go ahead and trim that off. And then that will now be the side border. Okay, and so we're going to add those on, and I'm going to do the same kind of thing where I'm going to fold this up here a little bit. Okay. I'm going to add the border now onto the two sides. And we're going to do that the same way as we did the others. We're going to fold this in half. And I'm going to crease it and put a pin right there. Okay. Alrighty. And then my halfway point is still, I can see my marking on it from where I marked it on the last border. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that in place right there. Right sides together. Again, I'm going to come out to the very edge, line those ends up, put a pin in there, come along to this side and do the same thing. Line that edge up. We're going to stick a pin there. Okay. And then I'm going to just kind of make sure it's nice and flat and put another pin kind of between those two, and then we'll go back here and put a pin between these two. And again, I'm just making sure all my edges are kind of lined up as best as I can get them, and then put a pin there. Okay, and since we do have all of these little seam allowances here, and I've pressed them going all different ways, I'm going to sew with this on top just so I can keep them oriented. I don't want it to flip up underneath and have to worry about what's going on underneath and try and keep it flat. So I'm going to just put that side on top so I can make sure that the seams stay the direction that they are, so that it will press out nice and flat. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add each side and then come back and measure the same for the top and bottom and get those borders on, and then that completes what we need to do for this month. So I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, and I'm excited to see everyone's quilts. Thanks a lot.